As a leader, one needs to be strong because that's required from a leader. But the flip side of this is that it would produce followers, because oftentimes you might find that a strong leader cannot work with another strong leader. So what are you doing now to prepare your successor so that he is ready to fill your shoes?
Well, development of people, development of talent has always been an important agenda for the bank. And during these 10 years, we have intensified our efforts. If we look at development of talent in the bank, probably we have one of the highest budget allocation, that is, to develop talent. And right now, I believe expenditure on talent development is about 15% of salaries. And that is very high. And at any one time, we have, for example, more than 400 scholarships. Of course, some of them are for new entrants to work with us, but at least 1/4 of these scholarships are for the staff of the bank. So the staff of the bank have the opportunity to develop themselves. They're given a lot of exposure. Leadership development is quite an important aspect of our talent development, especially for the senior staff. And I would like to think that we now have developed leadership not only for the next generation, but for the next one as well. That means the pipeline of leaders in the bank. And of course, there's empowerment and coaching, mentoring, and exposure given. And I participate in all this. I participate in the leadership development sessions in the bank. And then we have sessions, for example, for strategic conversations with the staff and senior staff in the bank, so that everyone has the opportunity to develop themselves. And of course, there are leaderships, future governors in the bank.
So a successor has been identified?
No, of course, when the time comes, they will emerge because they have the capability to do so. When I walk away from this organization, I will be can take great pride that there will be leadership in the bank that can be governors, deputy governors, assistant governors, and heads of departments, and so on, and so that the organization remains solid.
You mentioned that 15% of the salaries are allocated to training.
The allocation for training amounts to 15% of the budget for salaries. So it's a very high percentage. In many organizations, corporates, if you ask them, is probably 2 or 3%. And we noticed amongst central banks, it's about 7 or 8%. So ours is very high because we allocate resources for developing people.
So the central bank spends a lot on training. Yet before you became the central banker, the governor, you mentioned that you didn't receive any formal training in leadership. So how do you then manage that transition to becoming the central banker?
Right. Well, leadership actually also involves knowing your business, and that one I did have a lot of formal training as well as exposure to different aspects of central banking. I was, I suppose, very focused from when I was very young that I wanted to really excel in my knowledge on central banking. And this is something that I personally wanted to do. As soon as I graduated with my first degree, I knew already then that I wanted to study monetary economics, which is very important for central banking. And the university that I selected, and I only really applied to one university, and that is the University of Pennsylvania, and it's because they offered the most comprehensive program for monetary economics that was also not so biased in the sense that it wasn't monetarist focus, but it had non-monetarists, and it wasn't just focusing on theory by the theorists, but also it had empiricists that had all these models that they taught us on how to sort of assess policies that were policy mix, what was the optimal policy mix that would generate the kind of results that an economy needed to address various issues and so on. So I had that, and of course there was the Wharton School that taught finance, money and banking, and so I took courses from there. So I built up my knowledge. And then at some point in my career, the bank also offered me an opportunity to be based in London, to head our office there. And my portfolio there was financial markets and reserve management. So as an economist, I was able to reinforce my knowledge about how financial markets worked. And of course, a crisis happened at that point in time in Europe, and the ERM crisis, and we saw the collapse of the pound sterling and so on. And so that was a tremendous exposure that reinforced my knowledge that was important when we, in the end, experienced a crisis ourselves of a similar nature, actually. And of course, the other aspect is my own dissertation was on commercial bank portfolio behavior in an open developing economy. And it so happened that when I was working on it and almost finishing it, I met Dr. Mahathir. At that time, he was the Deputy Prime Minister, and he asked to meet Malaysian students that were studying at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was the only one that could be found. And when he heard I was doing research and writing about capital flows and how they responded to interest rate differentials and expected exchange rate changes, he actually told me, oh, I should hurry up and finish and come back and do work in Malaysia and serve the country. So it was very ironical, actually, that that was in 1978, and 20 years later, in 1998, he would ask me to head the central bank at the peak of the crisis to deal with capital flows. So it was quite ironical that that should happen.
So you build up technical competencies.
Yes.
Do you find that you had to change as a person when you became central banker until now? Were there changes in your personality?
Well, an important aspect of as you rise to the top, and I like to think I invented the word because in the bank it's used now, is having the ability to do integrated thinking. And along the way, I met people like Tony Buzan who introduced mind mapping to me. And this helps integrated thinking. There are tools to help you. And what do we mean by integrated thinking? Because you can no longer, we are living in an environment where you can no longer look at the past and project into the future. The future is highly uncertain. The future is highly ambiguous. And so how do you operate in this? So you have to change. You can no longer be like what you were. And this is what I tell bankers and so on who aspire to be CEOs, that if you were a good CEO in the 1990s, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be a good CEO in the 2000s. You have to reinvent yourself. And so I would like to think, yes, I did reinvent myself and acquired new skills because, and of course, your brain works in terms of associations rather than linearly. And therefore, you need to be able to leverage on how your brain works. And the mind map shows you these linkages. And integrated thinking is all about being able to draw together very diverse aspects of a situation or of a concept or of a circumstance that you have to deal with. And also within the organization, as I mentioned, you have all these diverse groups of people that you have to be able to integrate together. And if you are going to remain focused, if you're going to remain on course, on what you want to achieve and deliver, then you have to be able to integrate very different things together. And I'd like to think that over the years, I've developed the skills to be able to do that.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Zeti, Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, for the Leaders Room by the Iclif Leadership and Governance Centre.
It's been my pleasure.